In this lesson, we're going to discuss the components of creating an estimate. You need to understand these concepts so we can continue on learning how to build your own estimate. This is going to get technical, so please pay close attention. There are many different ways to compile an estimate. Depending on the type of construction and your company's level of detail, estimates could be calculated as a cost per square foot, price per hole, through historical company data utilizing proprietary spreadsheets, by hand with a detailed takeoff utilizing commercial construction labor data, or with commercial estimating software. It is possible, but in my experience very uncommon, to get a useful labor breakdown from your company when you assume responsibility for a project. However, it may actually be necessary to create your own takeoff. I've personally compiled my own estimate for every electrical project I've built in the last 25 years. I've done this in order to get the formatting I wanted for managing my projects. Once I have my estimate compiled, I can adjust the labor hours up or down by percentages until my estimated labor hours match the company's estimated labor hours. My preferred method of compiling a labor budget is with commercial estimating software. But before we can discuss that process, we need to look at the foundation of commercial estimating software, which is the labor unit. Virtually every piece of electrical material has been analyzed and assigned a time frame for its installation called a labor unit. For example, the labor to install half-inch EMT conduit might be 2.5 hours per 100 feet. Half-inch die-cast set-screw EMT connectors might be 0.05 hours each. Half-inch die-cast set-screw EMT couplings might be 0.05 hours each. 1/2 inch one-hole EMT straps might be 2.29 hours per 100. You may have noticed that I said might be for all the examples I listed. This is because labor units are adjustable to meet the difficulty of a particular project or to meet a company's actual installation rate. What I'm saying is, there is a general time frame allowed for each piece of material in the electrical trade. It is the estimator's job to adjust these allotted time frames to meet actual conditions based on difficulty or labor ability. It would do little good to use the same labor time frame for every project if your crews were not able to install material at the estimated rate. You need to think of labor units as a benchmark that can be adjusted up or down to match your actual project requirements and crew ability. Labor units are expressed in hundredths of an hour. To convert labor units to minutes, you would simply multiply the decimal by 60 minutes. For example, the die-cast set-screw EMT couplings above would require an installation time of 0.05 times 60, which equals 3 minutes each. In the case of the half-inch one-hole EMT straps listed above, the time listed is for 100 straps. So you would need to divide the allotted time by 100. 2.29 divided by 100 equals 0.0229, and then multiply the result by 60 in order to calculate the installation time for each strap. 0.0229 times 60 equals 1.374 minutes each. Sounds technical, doesn't it? But this is how labor budgets get compiled. The installation time for labor units are expressed in different units of measure. E for each unit, C for 100 units, and M for 1,000 units. All labor units are not created equal. Many different entities publish manuals and databases of labor units. The two most notable publishers are the National Electrical Contractors Association, NECA, and RS means. The National Electrical Contractors Association was formed in 1901 and published their first manual of labor units, the MLU, in 1923. Labor unit timeframes for each of these two publications are different. These lists can be rented or purchased in written or database format and are often used as the foundation for other estimating systems. Labor units in these databases are broken into multiple levels based on the difficulty of the installation. The NECA Manual of Labor Units provides 3 levels of difficulty, including normal, difficult, and very difficult. Each level graduating from normal to very difficult adds more installation time for each type of material. With commercial estimating software, you can also adjust between each level of difficulty by percentages. Difficult plus 10%, for example. This helps to fine-tune the labor unit to match your own company's rate of installation or to be more competitive. It should make sense that the more difficult the installation, the more time it would require for the installation. Difficulty can be affected by many issues. Following are some of the most common factors affecting installation rates, including the type of project. Typically, residential installations will be the fastest. Commercial installations will land in the middle, and industrial installations will be the most difficult. Building types will also affect installation rates. Single-story installations will be easiest, while multiple-story buildings can have a serious effect on installation rates. Getting workers, equipment, and material to a 7th floor remodel can create a huge impact on productivity. In my experience, prime contractors can make or break productivity. If they are not well organized, schedule poorly, and pile too many subcontractors into one work area, productivity can grind to a halt. Similarly, the prime contractor site supervisor can have a serious control over your productivity. If they are inexperienced, disorganized, or simply dislike you or your company, you will most certainly experience high installation rates. The difference in profitability between site supervisors within the same organization can have huge impacts. Subcontractors can affect your installation rate too if they move too slow and delay your workers. Working in different geographical areas or parts of the country can also require adjustments in labor rates. Extreme weather, either too hot or too cold, can affect installation rates. All of these factors need to be considered when adjusting for expected material installation rates. I know I just threw a lot at you, and fine-tuning your labor for each project is a complex process, but in most companies it's more guesswork than science. The good news is that I'm going to show you how to nail these costs right to the penny, and your company is going to love you for doing so. Some commercial estimating programs provide 6 levels of difficulty. Labor column 1 through 6. Within estimating software, these levels of difficulty can be adjusted further by percentages. For instance, you may select labor column 2 plus 15% for a certain installation based on your own company's historical data on a similar installation. The point is that all contractors are not capable of meeting the same installation rates on differing projects and will certainly require adjustments to the installation timeframes. For this reason, savvy contractors track actual installation times on their projects. Most often, this is accomplished through time card reporting by recording different types of installations by cost codes. For example, site work may be tracked by cost code 1000. Above slab work might be 2000. Services might be $3,000, and so on. Another way to track is by material, like 1,000 conduit, 2,000 wire, 3,000 light fixtures, and so on. We will touch on this in more detail in the future, but you need to understand that if you're going to make labor installation predictions in the creation of an estimate, you should track actual progress to ensure that you're meeting those installation goals. These cost codes can be adjusted and as detailed as the company might prefer in order to build accuracy. The data from tracking in this manner can help fine-tune competitive edge and help identify problem areas that need attention in order to compete in the marketplace. It's been my experience that many contractors do a terrible job of tracking this data. Many times I've worked with contractors who choose one level of labor installation and use it on every project. Often, they never hit these installation rates. If losses are experienced at the selected installation rate, instead of adjusting the labor to cover the losses on the next estimate, it is common to see companies start hiding money in other areas of the estimate in order to compensate for the losses in labor. For example, they may bolster material costs, equipment rental costs, or simply increase margins overall. Over time, they learn that if they choose labor column 2 and then overprice their material by 20%, they usually land projects and make money. I hope it makes sense to you when I say that it is much better to understand your true costs in every category. By doing so, you can accurately identify problem areas and work to improve them instead of chasing presumed issues that may or may not exist. I'll show you how to do this if your company does not already. So, what is included in a unit of labor? Does it just cover the time to install material? There's plenty of discussion of this on the web. I'll give you my opinion below, but based on a search of the web, here's a list of tasks I've found associated with labor units. Material installation, plan review, layout, non-productive labor, cleanup, tool setup and use, safety, material handling, and supervision. I should point out that NECA states that their labor units do not include supervision. Here's a direct quote from their website. NECA's labor units do not include any labor for supervision of any type. All electrical construction requires more than one level of supervision, and the magnitude of supervision depends on the complexity, type, and size of each project. Because each project is unique, it is the opinion of most electrical contractors that the labor for supervision is best estimated as a separate cost item and that no part of the supervision labor be included in the material installation labor units. Let's talk about that for a minute. There are a few categories of expenses that we need to discuss. The labor unit is just one of them. Let's start with overhead. There are plenty of definitions of overhead on the internet, and I encourage you to read some of them for a better understanding. But for our purposes, I'm going to define it this way. Overhead is any cost that the contractor incurs that cannot be directly associated with an individual project. This means it would include things like accounting fees, advertising, insurance, interest, legal fees, rent, repairs, supplies, taxes, and telephone bills. Another term you should be familiar with is direct job expenses. Direct job expenses are expenses that will be billed directly to the project, but normally do not directly have anything to do with installing material. That would include things like separate telephone service at the job site, portable toilets, dumpsters, engineering, storage, office trailers, and rental equipment. Here's my point. Supervision is not free and needs to be accounted for somewhere. If supervision is not included in the labor unit, it must be accounted for somewhere else, and you need to be sure your company has included it so you can bill your supervision time against it. Some companies include the cost of supervision in overhead by just including the supervisor's annual salary in their overhead calculation or a portion of it. Others add it to the direct job expenses as a budget based on the labor hours on the project and how much supervision they expect to incur to supervise it. How do you include supervision in the labor unit? Well, it might end up there by default. Let me explain that. When you accept your new project, you need to ask the project manager to show you where supervision is included in the project budget. If it's indirect job expenses, there should be a line item for it there. If there is, you need to determine what percentage of your time on the project it equates to. It should be about 10%. If it's much less than that, I would protest. The project manager might tell you that it is in the overhead for the project. That's fine, but you still need to know what percentage it includes, and no one's going to tell me it's included in overhead without showing me the overhead calculation so that I can verify that. I want to see the overhead calculation anyway because normally there are incentive bonuses on my projects, and I want to make sure they're not padding profit in there, which will make my challenge more difficult. I doubt that they will let you see these numbers. Ask anyway. If it's not in either of these categories, it will be included in the labor unit by default because supervision is not free and it has to be accounted for somewhere. Let's look at that for a minute. It's my contention that anything you want can be included in the labor unit if you want it to be. Let's say you have to make a 30-minute phone call to your mother every day to let her know you're still alive. When you select the labor factor for your project during the estimating process, you would just add a percentage to that factor. So labor column 2 plus 20 might just become labor column 2 plus 25%. In other words, you would fluff the labor hours on your project to include the daily phone call to your mother. You could do the same for supervision. My point is that you need to do your best to verify that your company has included supervision in your project and how to bill against it so that you're not doing it for free. If you're doing it for free, you'll have to rob hours from your installation time, which will make it more difficult to meet your labor budget. Do you understand this? I recently worked for a contractor that included supervision labor for their projects in direct job expenses, down to the superintendent level. They did not account for foreman level supervision. No one ever considered how foreman level supervision was going to be addressed, so by default it had to come out of the labor unit. Supervision is not free and it needs to be paid for somehow. Does everybody understand this? There are ways to install material in conjunction with supervision and not lose control of your project. What I mean is, you can squeeze extra time for supervision out of your project if you need to. For example, you could assign the easiest task to yourself. Generally, easy tasks contain fatter labor hours. This enables you to easily complete tasks ahead of schedule and use the extra time for planning and organizing without impacting your labor budget. You should also focus on tasks that you can wander in and out of without affecting the productivity of the other crew members. Tasks like panel makeup, trim out, and layout work well for this. Certainly, You would not want to be leading a major wire pull and insist that work stop while you run over to answer a question in another area of the project or attend a meeting, right? When I was a young lad, safety was rarely, if ever, considered. While safety is a component of all tasks, in recent years, due to increased focus on safety, I believe it has become a separate line item in the budget. Every project needs to be evaluated for safety and budgeted properly. Lately, I've been involved in a lot of solar projects. A roof mount solar system on a 7-story building will certainly require a much larger safety budget than a ground mount. If I was to try to apportion a certain percentage of my labor unit to safety, I'd be chasing my tail on every project because it's just too fluid. Therefore, other than safety meetings, I would not factor safety into my labor unit, choosing instead to factor it into a separate line item in the budget. Either way, make sure it's accounted for somewhere in the project budget, or you'll be doing it for free, and this one item can send you over budget quickly, depending on the project type and general contractor you're working for. For my purposes, here's the list of components I consider included in a labor unit. Material installation, plan review, layout, non-productive labor including breaks and safety meetings, tool setup and use, material handling and cleanup, supervision. If you are going to schedule separate individuals to handle each item in this list, in other words, one worker for material installation, another worker for plan review, another worker for layout, etc., it would be important to know what percentage of the labor unit each item consumed. In reality, only 2 or 3 individuals will be involved in all the components of a labor unit. Those individuals will be the worker, a supervisor, and possibly a material handler. On a small project, I would expect the worker to gather and organize their own material and would not account for material handling separately within the schedule. Normally, this would be accomplished by stocking a connex and yard with the estimated projected materials and having individual workers gather and transport it from there. On large projects, I would assign a dedicated material handler and have them receive, organize, deliver, and manage the material, as well as handle cleanup. This keeps high-paid journeymen from wandering the site looking for material and keeps them right where we need them, installing material. It has also been my experience that if you make individual workers responsible for their own material on large projects, they tend to make a mess of the material storage areas to the point that they cannot find anything and end up squandering huge amounts of time trying to locate and reorder material that does exist but cannot be found. If you use a separate material handler, material handling should account for about 10% of the labor unit. The breakdown of a labor unit would look like this: 10% supervision, 10% material handling and cleanup, plan review 5%, layout 5%, non-productive labor including breaks and safety meetings 5%, tool setup and use 5%, material installation 60 to 70% depending on whether you use a dedicated material handler or not. I encourage you to read and study more about labor units and their components. There's much valuable information on the web. Be sure to filter your research by contemplating who will be responsible for tasking each component of the labor unit. Remember that ultimately, you will have to address and divide each component among your individuals in your schedule.